work in the judicial branch. I'm not here on that capacity. My interest is really understanding where we are in this current moment. It feels like there's something really significantly shifting with balance of power, and so there's a lot of questions about that. I'll show you.
Yeah, okay. So I'll start with a little bit of a story. So I'm going to start outside of the technology spectrum, kind of. The other morning on November 1st, I woke up and I read a couple of Facebook articles. There was some stuff about Trump's folks being indicted, about Facebook and Amazon not being able to know how to keep the Russians out of our business, about the shooter down in San Antonio who shot up a church. And I'm horrified. And then it's November 1st, so I also see an article, a story about Ellen DeGeneres sends a couple of her producers through a haunted house. And it was a man and a woman going through the haunted house, and all the zombies are jumping out at them. At one point, the man grabs the woman and uses a shield between her and the zombie. And she says, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" Laughing. And he says, "I'm protecting you." So there's something about all we have to fear is fear itself, something around that spectrum. So I'm noticing that as I'm in these conversations, as I'm in these panels and presentations, my anxiety is elevated, my breathing is shallow. I'm sitting here thinking, oh my God, what do we, nobody here has any of the answers, right? We have thoughts, we have hopes, but we don't have any answers. And then I have to remember to breathe, right? The important thing is that we continue the conversation, we connect with one another. The frustration is, there's a lot of talking at, right? There's a lot of information coming in. Breathe, share with each other. How do we reconnect? What are the zombies and who are the humans? Let's not use each other as shields, but let's actually connect with one another. So I'll start there.
And if we have had whoever's supposed to be here from Hexalina, if you've arrived, please come join us up front. My name is Matthew Schutte. I'm with Holochain. Holochain is tech, right? We're an alternative to blockchain stuff, but tech wasn't really our motivation. Like many of the folks in this room, you're here because you're interested in humans and how humans can work together in ways that work better as a group, work better for the individuals involved. Our big why was basically, how can we have humans coordinate their activity without that group becoming an oppressive thing, without power actually concentrating at that group level? And both inhibiting the ability for that group to change shape and evolve, but also marginalizing some of the people who were participating in the first place. And so we ended up designing a new way of doing applications. And that might not seem super relevant at first glance to how we're going to organize, but for us it was really critical if we're trying to organize at larger scales than the stuff that humans are really good at organizing in very fluid ways at very small scales. And we're really bad at organizing in very fluid ways at really big scales. And so we took some principles that we're sort of borrowing from nature for how to maintain agency while collaborating and foster adaptive capacity. And so I'll just sort of speak to one of those principles and not get into the tech. Where is English held? Who owns the English language? Nobody, right? That's kind of a silly question. It's held in the brains and bodies of each of the participants. We hold it locally. The word that we use for this is it's stored holographically. Holographic basically meaning that each of the parts can see the whole, but from their own perspective, from the perspective of the experiences that they've had. So is my version of English and his version of English identical? No, he has jargons that I am not aware of at all. And I have jargons that he might not be. I'm a big wave surfer, right? So I have all these words for surfing that he might not find familiar. And that's okay. That's actually really advantageous for us as a community. It's one of the things that enables language to evolve so fluidly. The fact that we don't have to be in perfect alignment and yet we're still able to coordinate means that one of us can go off and try something new. And if it proves useful, we start using it and we share it with somebody else. And if it proves useful to them, they start using it and they share it with somebody else. And our learnings can propagate across the community. But the risk was local to the initial experiment or experimenter. We think that this principle of holographic storage is actually the key to adaptive capacity because it enables a community to get the maximum amount of learning in real lived context for the minimum amount of risk. It also enables us to diverge and go down different paths as individuals or as groups. Somebody comes up with a new word for the sound that a carburetor makes when it has too little air. Wow, that might be a really useful word for the mechanics. And it may propagate widely within the community of mechanics. And it might not ever get used at all by a neurosurgeon. And that's okay. That divergence is part of what makes that ecosystem rich. So for us, we go, oh, wow, this holographic storage thing is actually how we do language naturally. It's how we do culture naturally. We hold the expectations about what is appropriate behavior inside of each of us, and we diverge slightly in that. It's not yet how we do digital communication and coordination. And so for us, the motivating factor was, how do we make it so that the way that groups hold their agreements with one another, how do we make it so that that mirrors this holographic architecture that we see all across nature? Okay, thank you. So just a heads up, you with hexalina? Yes. Perfect. So we figured, we didn't coordinate it all. We'll do a quick intro for each of our topics or things, and then we'll try to have a bit more of an open participatory. Well, both of us have gone. Okay.
Hello, I'm Francis. Is that my microphone? Okay. I'm Francis from Hexalina, and with Pascal we created our company. And when we were creating our company, we wanted to solve topics that we have heard also the last 2 days. In all the digital platforms, what we heard is we have difficulties when you're a digital platform to create trust. We have difficulties in monopolies. We see that Uber, Airbnb, they create monopolies. How can we break those monopolies? How can the members that contribute value to those digital platforms also benefit of the value that has been created and not only the transaction cost? Another topic that we always hear every time is funding. And all the solutions you have now for funding is always the classical debt-financed market. But if you look to all those problems and you look to the techniques of the blockchain, I will not talk about the value, but the techniques of the blockchain, you can use that to create and help your digital platform to overcome all those obstacles. So what we have done with Hexalina is we created 4 APIs to make sure that the complexity of blockchain is taken away, but you can help to plug it into your platform for trust. And we created trust to reputation. We have a reputation algorithm that creates your reputation as a digital asset on the blockchain. So it means it's not our reputation. It's the reputation we created to your community, but you can also create your reputation. You can use it to plug it into other platforms because it's on the blockchain. It belongs to you. Second is that we also created an API on valuation. That's for your community. Every quarter, every 6 months, you can calculate the value of your community with our API. And we redistribute the value of the last 6 months back to the members in the community based upon your reputation. How we've worked, every action has some value, and we redistribute the value back again to the reputation. In such a sense also that we avoid speculation. So we've taken out an element of speculation to make sure that at the end it's also a zero-sum game, that the value is only within the community and the community sees the value. So that's how we also said that by doing some action in your community, is it now reviewing a CV, is it waiting at home for a neighbor to collect a box that will be delivered. It creates a value, and that value can be exchanged later on through other currencies. But at least you don't have to create a debt first to create value. And that's how we see the techniques of blockchain can help the digital co-ops. That's my short introduction.
Questions or comments?
Trying to figure out how to transition to a conversation. I think the question at the core for me is, based on where we've come from this weekend, what we've been exposed to, what we thought, what new information, what existing information have we come into? What stands out as the most important issue for you right now? For me, there's an issue of trust. There's an issue of trust, and there's a matter of what does that mean. I'm working on an idea as trust as a technology, and it goes beyond the idea of digital technology. The thing for me is I recognize, I said this in an earlier panel, I am the interface between the self and the we. I have to pay close attention to what is going on inside of me to know how I should respond to what's happening in my world, my responses to what's going on. A lot of that happens up here in my head, but up here in my head I can confuse the map and the territory. I really need to pay attention to what's going on in my body, my heart rate, my breathing rate. Am I able to be present and connect with the people around me? Are we able to know what answers need to be answered, what questions need to be answered, what commitments need to be made, what connections need to be made in order to step forward, in order to take the next step to do something. So I'm really looking at the level of need. What do you need to know to move forward, to take the next step from here? I'm tempted to kind of break off into groups of 5 or 6 and have a small group discussion and then do that.
I don't know. I just want to know what maybe the case study, just to kind of go on your question, abstract.
So I'll spit. I don't know if David, if you have a summary that's along those lines. I think you're in this conversation in a much more philosophical sort of positioning. So Holochain, I'll just dive into a little. I sort of talked about the why. I didn't talk about the what. So what is Holochain? It's a way of running applications where the participants themselves are running the application. The way that today's web works, if I wanted to send a message to him on Facebook, I don't send a message to him, I send a message to Facebook. And then Facebook sends the message to him. And when he replies to Facebook, and Facebook replies to me. And you can think of it as if it was 2 people sitting at a table and they're talking to one another, but there's a person on the end who actually is the one passing the notes. And occasionally they hand it to somebody else, they hand them a pile of cash and they scream some advertisement at me. Because they're not going to do this shit for free, right? This note passing, because it costs them something. That's baked into the architecture of the web, is that you have to have a web server. And so Holochain, like a lot of other people, got excited about, hey, what if you didn't have to have a web server there? The blockchain folks went, we could solve this by having everybody keep a copy of everything that anybody has ever done. And that's a useful solution. And blockchain was invented to solve a particular problem, which I'll distill as, how do we do digital anonymous cash, i.e., no identity, I don't have any trust, I don't have reputation. How can I still trust in this transaction, this one-time interaction? How can I trust the record without having to trust the record keeper? That's a fine architecture. It's probably not the right architecture for all of the variety of social relationships that humans are interested in engaging in. In fact, if you have to solve stuff without trust, that's extremely costly. Think about what kind of, how much more difficult it would be to go through life if you had no idea who you were interacting with ever, from moment to moment, right? If every single interaction was its own separate thing, that's crazy. So trust is this massively cost-saving thing, and it's sort of sloppy, that anytime we are taking a risk with someone, we're making ourselves vulnerable. Anytime we're delegating something to someone else, we're making ourselves vulnerable. Right? When I go order a meal from a restaurant, I'm making myself vulnerable to the fact that they might not have cooked it well enough and I could get food poisoning. So to kind of pull it back off the philosophical and back onto, well, how do we pull this off? The how is pretty simple. It's instead of running the application in a web server, or instead of running the application on the machines of a bunch of miners, so essentially we've replaced a single organization with an oligarchy of competing miners, but it's still external to the participants themselves. It's still over here. Instead of doing that, we have the participants themselves be able to do it. But in order to have that work, you actually have to have it be economically feasible for all of the participants to be able to hold onto the records. If we're doing this with cell phones, my cell phone, there we go. If we're doing this with cell phones, I can't hold a 120 gigabyte blockchain and do all the crazy processing that I need to be doing to participate in Bitcoin on my cell phone. It's not viable. The architecture doesn't work for that use case. But there are other architectures that enable us to spread a load in a shared or distributed way and be able to do that in a lightweight manner. BitTorrent, how many of you are familiar with BitTorrent? File sharing, right? BitTorrent was a way for a group of people to run distributed data storage. Well, Holochain took that model and we combined it with some of the pieces that folks used to create blockchain, which are hash chains, an immutable log. So I've done these things in an order, and after I've shared that with somebody else, they're going to be able to notice if I change the order, right? But instead of doing what the blockchain folks did, which is keep a record of everything that's happened in the entire community, we shifted to a model that's a bit more like Git. For those of you who are familiar with software development, Git is the most widely used system for doing open source software development. But it's a model that relies on identity. You have the identity of the individual developer, and on their copy they're making changes. And when they share that back to somebody else as a proposal, that party gets to decide, ooh, do I want to incorporate those changes? But it has identity baked in. It's actually an agent-centric model of distributed computing as opposed to a data-centric model like the blockchain is. So what we're doing is, a Holochain app has 3 parts. And a Holochain app is a particular application. So if we're doing peer-to-peer Twitter and it's all the people on this side of the room doing peer-to-peer Twitter, and I'm engaged in also peer-to-peer Facebook with the people on this side of the room, when I'm doing things in Twitter, it's only shared with the people who are in that application. When I'm doing things on Facebook, it's only shared with the people who are in that application, right? The way that works is each of us will be running that app locally on our phones. And when I take an action, I initially write it locally on my own device in this log. And then I share it to this distributed hash table, which basically means a few copies land randomly in the network with other users. And their device checks that what I'm doing is okay, right? They check the validation rules with their local copy of the application. Hey, if this is Twitter, is it more than 140 characters? If not, okay. Is it signed by the right person? Is it signed by Matthew? Yep, okay. Then I'll share it. So that work gets spread across the network, and there's a handful of folks. So you can have 1 million people running Twitter, but you might only have 20 copies of this, which means that it's lightweight enough that each of us is able to use a cell phone and run a Facebook scale application as well as a bunch of other apps just on that phone. The one last thing that I'll say, because we are in the same category as blockchain, people start getting confused about this really quickly. We are not trying to solve the exact same problem that blockchain was trying to solve. Bitcoin specifically was trying to create a universal ordering of events across the entire community. Right? They were trying to manufacture, the reason for blockchain is to manufacture a universal ordering of events. But that's not how those events actually occur. Einstein figured out 100 years ago that we perceive of events happening in different orders relative to our position in space-time. It can be useful for particular applications to manufacture a universal ordering of events, but it's not required for social coordination. In fact, when you look at the data warehouses for Facebook and Google and Amazon, they don't create a universal ordering of events. They use a different model known as eventual consistency, which takes this into account. We use that model too. The last piece that I'll say is a particular community is going to hold its agreements in that code of the application. And that's a way for us to make sure we're playing the same game. And if somebody starts playing the game differently, we go, ooh, and we can take action to decide to ignore that activity, decide that, hey, we don't like the way this person's playing, and begin to ignore them altogether. But it's also a way of allowing us to engage in certain social relationships while being able to have other communities engage in different social relationships, or us be able to do both and actually be the bridge between both. From a philosophical perspective, we think about this as, hey, I engaged in a very specific set of practices in college that had to do with grades and papers and getting a degree, and I learned a bunch of knowledge there. And then I go into a workplace, and I engage in a very different set of social relationships. But I'm able to take information acquired in the one and use it in the other, and it's part of what makes that workplace so vibrant, is that the people participating there also participated in a bunch of other contexts, played other games. It's what makes that space really rich and vibrant. So hopefully that gives a little bit of background of what we're creating and why. Yeah.
How is your organization structured?
So Holochain is, for the last few years, it's been an all-volunteer organization. It's open source software. We released our alpha 2 weeks ago, which basically, it's called the adventurer release, meaning like, hey, this is buggy and new, so don't build critical infrastructure on it just yet. We are setting up a foundation to support that open source project. The same humans are also setting up a separate organization that is a for-profit entity and is really about making this fully peer-to-peer architecture easier for today's users of the web to interact with. So if we've got a bunch of Uber drivers that want to do peer-to-peer Uber, and they're running that application amongst themselves, but they want to make it easy for anybody to just go to a browser and hit a button and have a ride come and pick them up, somebody needs to bear the load of serving that website. So that's a demand that's not offset by a contribution. The thing that we're setting up at the moment is called Holo, and it's basically an incentivized hosting ecosystem for making it so that the members of that application are incentivized to do that kind of work. Right? So if Jim, if he has his laptop and uses a little bit of extra storage and a little bit of extra processing power to serve that query, he gets compensated in cryptocurrency. And that organization that's setting up that whole hosting ecosystem takes a percentage. They take a little bit less than 1%, and a portion of that goes back to the foundation to support the underlying Holochain infrastructure. So that's kind of our mechanism for trying to bootstrap this. Now that said, the other ambition that we have, we're trying to hold that organization closely. We have not given equity to any investors. Our goal is to hand that over to the community eventually. But yeah. Yes. So he has to, if we're dog fooding Holochain. So are we eating our own dog food? Yeah. To the extent that we can, right? Like we would love to build all of the applications all at once. Right now we're using Mattermost, which is an open source alternative to Slack for our communication. We've built a simple version of a Holochain based Slack alternative, but that has gotten pushed to the back burner. So we're not maintaining that at the moment. With Holochain as just a basic infrastructure, we're also rolling out a number of applications that we think are going to be widely useful for other application developers. So one is what's called a distributed public key infrastructure, but it's just a simple tool for making it easier for an individual to manage identity across contexts. If I'm this thing over here and I'm this over here, how can I bridge between those? And how can I at the beginning of my activity in Twitter, say, hey, if something goes bad, I'm going to use this thing over here to kill that key, to say this is no longer me, or to replace that and say I want to show up in a different way. So when it gets to identity management, there's a bunch of complexity. We don't want that layer of, hey, where can I turn to if things go wrong? We don't want that to be held proprietarily by someone else, and so we're creating a commons-based Holochain application to be available for a service of that sort. Yeah.
I've been thinking about, okay, how do I talk about this stuff? The thought for me isn't so much about protocols and specifics and the details of the implementation and, and dogfooding, but really the application. So the question for me would be interesting, again, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting, Holochain and hexalina, or other possible implementations, RChain or whatever. If we take a bunch of implementers and say, hey, let's go into East Austin, let's go into Detroit, let's go into the suburbs of cities, third world countries, and let's try to actually bootstrap platform cooperatives using these infrastructures, and let's get some on the ground tools. What's actually working about these? Compare notes and see, does this work? What are the bugs in it? How do we compare this with that? You know what, really, I love the way Holochain does this, but my God, it's just too slow. Or Hexalina does this perfectly, but I really can't explain it to the people. Only 5% of the people understand.
I will try to give an example of a project we work on without talking about the technology. So, we will not talk about the technology, how we do it, but use case, how we can help a company. So it's a company, it's a classical consulting company in Belgium, and there are only 2 owners of the company. But they say, listen, our employees, they do much more than we expect that they have to do. They love our company. And we want to give some of the value that has been created by the company also to our employees. And I learned about this 2 days about EWOPs and ELOPs. But what we'll do with them based upon our technology is that the 2 owners of the company says, if you do a standard stock option plan, the employees have to dig into their savings. And we want to avoid it. So how can we create value by their work they do, and then exchange it into value and ownership of a company? So that's what we do with them, with our technology, is that every action they do, it's locked. It's a reviewing a CV, it's being on a marketing event, it's going to talk to schools, recruit people. And that value, the company has said, listen, every annual report, we say, for that value that you have created during the company because you have worked for us, we are ready to exchange that value against some stock options. It's legally another option in Belgium, but so they, without having to tap in their own savings, by working to the company, they can exchange the value they've created through the year, and then get some long-term value back of the company. And they become owners of the company also. So it's gradually evolving into not a real cooperative at the moment, but they're making the first steps. And that's how we help companies trying to, using the technology. I wanted to go into details how to do it. Another example is of a group of designers that said, listen, design of those chairs can only have only one purpose, being that chair. If it's broken, it's broken. Cannot do anything without it. So those designers says, when we do a design, it must be a design that can be reused for building other stuff. So what does that group do? At the moment, they upload designs. The other group reevaluate the designs. Oh, that's a good design. We take it into a common open database. Afterwards, you can use that design to build other furniture or other topics or other items. But what happens now also is that they have a large database of designs. It's open, it's used by others, but they have commercial requests. There's a company coming and say, that design, I want to put it in production, I will make 10,000 shares of it. How will you now license it? And so we have a model again on the blockchain that the group can say, okay, do we accept that offer, yes or no? We accept that offer, that's the price. When the value comes back and of the production of the shares that have been sold, we distribute it again to the community based upon all the designs that has been used. So that's how we see that more and more, if we open, work together, and based upon the blockchain technology. I don't know if that answers some questions.
To be practical, let me speak a bit about I would say our experience in diminishing expectations about the blockchain. So when we started, the first idea was precisely what has been explained for the people who were. Sorry, the idea was to more or less do what has been explained in the session about blockchain, saying, okay, it would be really great if we could enable cooperatives or collaborative platforms that actually have a way to be owned by the people that are using them. And it's a very powerful concept. And it aligns very well with blockchain. So that was our first idea, saying, okay, well, it's pretty simple, isn't it? There are all these tokens existing. Well, we just create tokens, they are the value of the company, and we redistribute the tokens between the people owning the company. It's very simple. Then we started developing things, and we discovered what most developers on the blockchain know is that most of this stuff is definitely not ready for production, not even ready for beta in sometimes. So a lot of things actually don't work. So we said, okay, what realistically can we use already? It's a question that has been asked actually in the other session also, what's working today? And we said, okay, what's working today? Let's scale down our expectations. What works today? Well, what works today is the fact that we can store something in a transparent way, in a way that is trusted by the different people, and that there is no discussion about what is stored, and that is transparent and that everybody can check. At least that exists. Okay, so then let's go to the platform cooperatives and let's ask them what they need for a change instead of trying to build a technology solution and looking for a problem. Back at WeShare, I think I remember, we discovered that the number one problem of everybody was financing. How to kickstart financing, how to prime the pump, like Donald would say. And so we said, okay, this technology would be very, very interesting for actually running each platform based on technology as a different economy. Which comes back to the question that the people asked in the other session also, what would be the exchange rates? So how do we allow that? Well, we have to redistribute the value. Okay, that's fine. How do we redistribute the value? Well, to redistribute the value, we need two things. And the APIs came from there. We need first to be able to evaluate the value. Because it's very simple to say, how we have to redistribute the value. Okay, but then we have to calculate the value. Because you cannot redistribute what you don't know how much value you have gained. That's one. And two, if you want to redistribute the value, well, you want to redistribute that based on what people did in your network. And not based on the number of bonuses or stars or whatever that they've collected. Based on the value that they have brought to the company, to your platform. So that's the first element, the reputation element. So we ended up creating the reputation element, and we ended up creating the valuation element in order to, one, evaluate who is the most relevant in your network, and two, who to redistribute, how to redistribute, and how much to redistribute. And then we had the third element, because a lot of people said, oh, that's really nice, but that's very algorithmic based, so you forget about the human element, and we said, oh, you're right. So we added a governance API, which is really what was missing from the beginning, but we just were, too tech-oriented to see that. So we added the governance part, which same thing, again, leverages in the blockchain just what works today, which is, okay, if you have 900,000 people, I can dream, voting on something, well, we have to have a way to store these votes. If you have, in a way that nobody then can discuss that this was indeed done. If you have to resolve a conflict between 9,000 cooperators in 62 countries, well, you have to find a way to store that in a way that is transparent and that everybody can see. If I redistribute the value, I want everybody to be able to see to who it was redistributed. I don't have a problem with that because these people were the most relevant to my network. So actually there, we created this technology and we created that in the form of APIs in order for the platforms to use it without knowing anything about this technology. What we hope is that over time, the blockchain technology will mature, that one day we will, I hope, get to your level like Holochain. By the way, I totally agree with you. I think that you should pay attention to what was said there, because I think eventually with all of us putting most of our life in the cloud in terms of data, this is going to be eventually the only way that we will be able to scale this. Because the pipes are fat, but at certain moments, if we don't distribute the load, it will not work. Okay, but for the moment, it just works like that, and then we hope that it will evolve over time. Okay, I hope this was practical. Yes.
What sort of value or activities are you sort of collecting later?
Yeah, that was another very good point. We said, okay, when we started at the PowerPoint level, it was easy. Like, okay, we are going to calculate reputation based on X data point. And of course, when we had the first customer, we said, like, okay, now it needs to become practical. So what we ended up with is a model where reputation is based on two separate components. One component that we called the network component, where we actually measure all the interactions between the different stakeholders in the network. Okay, so to take a practical example, we have a customer where it's a jobs platform based on referrals. Okay, so they have three stakeholders: the companies that post the jobs, the referrers that refer experts, and the experts. Now, we try to map all the possible interactions between these three different stakeholders, and the company then puts a weight on that, saying, okay, that's a good interaction, that's a good player, that's somebody that adds value, and so we want to actually put more weight on this. These elements of these data points, these interactions are different for each platform. So we do a workshop with the platform in order to define what elements will be part of that. The second part of the reputation model, so that's the interaction part. The second part is based on more something that we call the gamma value, which is a bit like a karma value, which is the transactional values of what you want to encourage or what you want to punish, specifically on one transaction. Okay, you do that, that's good karma. You do that, that's bad karma, and we will put you more or less there. And again, these decisions are made by the platform, of course, because we don't know that. And the platform, of course. Yeah. Yes. So when we call the platform, we are just providing the technology.
About the jobs.
Yes. Yes.
So would they determine the value of
Yes.
the job?
Yes, of course.
The reputation?
Yeah, because we are not in the HR business, so we don't know about it. To give you an example, they said to us, okay, if somebody says, okay, I refer an expert, and the experts and the company accepts the expert, then that's fine. Now, if I refer an expert as a referrer, and the company refuses the referral, the company, and there are then subtypes, of course. They say, okay, one possible reason is, the job offer does not exist anymore. Okay, that's fine. I mean, that doesn't impact the referrer. But if the reason for refusal was, the CV and the job offer don't match at all, well, that makes you a quite bad referrer. Okay, so that's the kind of interactions. Now, on the other part, in the transactional values, there, for example, they said to us, okay, responding quickly is something that we want to encourage. It's nice because it creates more value. Responding slowly or not responding at all, well, that's really a bad behavior that we want to make sure that is punished in a way.
So you have a network of people who are contributing value.
Yes.
And other people are
Yes.
not.
Actually, if you that's interesting thing is that the output of that is not 65.7. It's a network, and you have this network with bubbles, and these bubbles actually represent how much people actually are relevant to the network and how much they bring value to the community. And I remember very well when there was a session where they said about what was the name of the photo company? Stocksy. And said that like 26% brought like 80% of the value. And we saw exactly that. So we ran the algorithm on the historical data, and we saw exactly that. We saw that there were a few super connectors that actually had created a lot of value, and a lot of people would just had very few interactions, which is, I think, a sense of how it works in reality. Yeah? Okay, thank you.
I think we're probably short on time. We're doing a breakout thing. So, other questions from the audience or comments, thoughts, or hey, this is technical, it's not relevant, or yes.
I could understand with the challenges are there are already examples that it's really implemented in a way, but very pragmatic for kind of non-tech. I want to realize the core project is competitive governance and also this value distribution. What's the state of the art right now? Should I aspire to use this technology, architecture, to realize it already now, or how long is it to wait until it's kind of not too risky, not too expensive, not too slow?
So I don't know these guys at all. I don't, right? Like I don't know them at all. But it sounds to me like they have a business already set up so that you can come to them and start running your co-op through them right now. That's not the case for us, right? We're lower level infrastructure. Our customers, to be totally honest, are not customers. Our stakeholders, the people who are really interested in interacting with us right now, are software developers, right? They're the folks who are wanting to build that next layer. And it's early enough in our maturation cycle that we're probably not ready for you this month. Although there are people in Europe, we're doing about 4 hackathons in Europe, I think, over the next month or so, and some in India, where people are getting really excited about doing cooperatively owned energy systems, food production, et cetera. But they're going to be doing the first swipes, right, at proofs of concepts for those. So I think you can probably go to them and sign up and start working. Yeah, and we're in an earlier stage, and we're not going to get. Hopefully, somebody shows up at some point doing the same role that they're doing, and makes it much easier for non-technologists. Like there's going to be service providers in our ecosystem doing that role as well. And I will say one other thing, which is philosophically, there's a very different. You get to a different place coming from a blockchain approach versus the approach that I was describing with Holochain. With the blockchain approach, you very quickly run into the question that you guys ran into and that you kind of were pointing at, which is, well, who decides what's valuable and how, right? And you're doing that at the community is deciding level, which means there has to be a boundary on that community. It's an organization that exists like a legal entity today does, and it's got very clear boundaries because it has to operate as a single entity. Whereas in a holochain world, it's not quite like that. This community may not be running one application. They might be running 50 different applications that are how they manage their relationships with one another in various ways, and not everybody's running all of those. And there are little agreements within each of those things about how we're going to value things, but it's much more just a communication and fostering system where the value judgments are being made from the perspective of those participants in the context of those relationships. And so that ends up being a much fuzzier boundary, right? Where is the boundary of the organization? Depends on who you ask. And I think when you look at how work is starting to show up today, it has those fuzzier boundaries. There's independent contractors. There's other people who are participating in some contest, and the relationships don't follow the mythology that we've lived in for a really long time about, oh, we'll build this new body, which we'll call a corporation, and it will have clear boundaries, right? They're starting to be much more emergent. So, yeah.
Try this one more time. The problem that I'm trying to solve, the problem that I'm interested in, and I don't have an implementation at all yet. So both these groups are way ahead of me. But the problem that I'm looking at is, and somebody mentioned, how do you deal with the exchange value? between one currency and another and all of that. And I'm looking at it from how do I orient around the individual rather than around the cooperative? How do, as some people have said, let's see, the Drewtopia is one of the organizations that's here that has a website, and they want to make it so that you can pick up your website and transplant it anywhere else, so that you're not locked into their platform, you're not locked into their solution, but you still have the execution costs of picking up, moving it, and plugging it in somewhere else. It's not, you could do that, and they give it to you, and that's possible to do that. But I want to make it so that transaction cost is as minimal as possible. And ideally, what I would think of is something like this gathering has some inherent value that we're contributing to some network, right? We've done something to do a little bit extra work and convene something, maybe me less than these guys, but we're doing something that maybe it's 10 credits of value towards some collective thing. And you all are here, you're participating. You all get 1 point of value. You ask a question, maybe you get 2. I don't know what the mechanics of that are, but some way in which our participation actually contributes to something, and not within the context of a specific co-op. But just like this dollar bill isn't just valuable here, right? It might be. We could say that let's limit it to the currency to being valuable there. But that may not. We may want to make it more fungible than that. So there's some sense in which I want to know, how do I as an individual carry my currency with me rather than it being tied up in a specific. How do I make the exchange rate so that it's more trivially done? And that, come shoot it down.
I just wanted to say that, the way you're talking about, it does exist. I mean, we're doing it, right? So it does exist. And if you believe the Eastern traditions, there's Akasha, and it's got all the accounts of everything that exists, right? And stuff. But maybe it would help to think about, how we all contribute to some space concepts, and then what are the categories, because I was thinking when you were talking earlier, would it help us to understand the categories of needs that we have? Because even in a lot of things that have been talked about today, there are different kinds of things that we're trying to get to, whether we're startups or whether we're researchers or whatever, and those kinds of elements could be beneficial to this community. I think our community that we've got that's just talking about this right now.
So we think about currency in a really unusual way. Our group doesn't think about currency as just monetary forms of currency. We think of currency as signaling systems, currencies as signaling systems. And what that really means is that currencies make flows of activity visible to the participants in some community. Dollars make the fact that you had helped somebody at some point in the past visible to me, and I'm willing to accept that because it makes visible to the next person that I had helped somebody as well. But they're not the only forms of currency that we use in our society. We use currency in the form of a grade on a paper, right? That makes visible that you had mastered the subject that paper was about. A grade in a class, visible that you had mastered the material in that class. A degree, visible. It makes visible that you had mastered the material and performed well enough in a bunch of classes that got you the right credits to get the degree. And that degree may open up a job offering, or at least the interview. It composes, it synthesizes a bunch of activity and distills it down into a signal that you are then able to pass along to another party, so that they're not having to sit alongside you the entire time to see your entire history before they know how to interact with you. And so they're just tools. They're social tools. And the different communities are going to pay attention to different signals. If we're running a babysitting cooperative, a signal that might be really important is, do you pick your kids up on time? If you're picking your kids up on time, great. If you're somebody who rarely picks their kids up on time, and I know that tonight I have to go right at 5, I might not be willing to watch your kid today. You might need to go to somebody else today. Despite the fact that you always tip well, I still have to be somewhere at 5. It's not a money-like currency. It's different, but it helps the members of that community make better decisions about how to interact, where to prioritize their time, and their effort. So for us, currencies are really about facilitating more intelligent social functioning, right? People have mentioned collective intelligence. And when I first started hearing that term years and years ago, I thought, oh, they're talking about like some, global brain. No, it's collective intelligence. Yes, some people may be talking about some global brain. But many of us, when we use the term collective intelligence, we're really talking about the methods and structures that communities use to be able to extend our ability to make sense of to literally sense our environment, to interpret the information that is being sensed, to decide what we want to do, to be able to prioritize amongst the various things that we find desirable, and to be able to take action. And it's our ability to extend or delegate those capacities that are really what these social technologies are about at the end of the day. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Time to sort of go back and look at the values of things. So values of work, values of learning, values of gender work, and with this sort of model, I think there's an opportunity to I guess in a way rework that whole system of values and what we value and what we'll exchange that value for. So that's what we're sort of thinking about when we're at the University of Technology in Sydney, and how do we think 10 years, 20 years time, post-automation, how are we going to value things like learning or caring work or, things that we don't necessarily value in a sort of monetary way.
And maybe shouldn't in a monetary way, right? Like I said, and maybe shouldn't in a monetary way, because monetary, at its core, what it does is it composes and presses together a bunch of different valuations into some one-dimensional valuation. And what I'm saying is actually pulling those things apart and being able to have different communities pay attention to different signals, as opposed to having to all speak the same one-dimensional signal, how many dollars, actually enables the ecosystem to operate in a much richer way. When you look at natural systems, they don't have a single currency that they speak. They have really rich signaling mechanisms, and they have the ability to hold coherence at various layers. The cell is able to hold coherence because it has a membrane. The inside is sort of insulated from activity outside of that, and the organism does the same thing, and the social group does the same thing. And so we have these composable layers of social coherence, and there's signaling mechanisms across those, and they aren't one-dimensional. So for me, it's really critical to move way beyond value in the dollars sense and towards a much richer version of values in the kind of ways that you're interested in. But my belief is in the past, a lot of our world is so fixated on the dollar side that it's how can we get those things to be valued in dollars? And what I think is really exciting is, oh, wow, we might actually be able to find much better ways of having those things not be valued in dollars, but valued using different signaling systems, and yet we can steer on that basis.
I think it's also a question of dollars, of people being lazy. Just the advantage of dollars is that it just creates one single and easy to understand benchmark. So if you translate everything to dollars, it's easy. Whatever you have, you value it against one benchmark. So if we have technology, and I believe in things like smart contracts eventually being our avatars in the blockchain world, that take away that complexity, then that whole problem of having multiple benchmarks is not a problem anymore because it's taken care of. So we can remain lazy, but the reality behind it can become more complex. That's really where value can evolve. And therefore, maybe post-automation, well, maybe it could be a better world in that sense at least, because everything doesn't necessarily have to be translated to that single benchmark, which is dollars, which we all have more or less in the back of our minds a problem with, but still everybody does it.
And I'll share one thing that was sort of a recent insight for me, which had to do with, hey, if you have these different communities, and I'm not participating in that community, but somebody has said something nice about you there. And you're able to then bring it across to me. It only has currency for me. It's only meaningful to me to the extent that I know and trust that community. To the extent that I have some bridge into that community, a friend who's participating there or something else. If I have no relationship with that other community, they can say nice things about you, but it doesn't really matter for me. It's like somebody, having a great credit score and showing up in a foreign country looking to get somebody to trust them to make baklava, right? Like, great, that's a signal that's not relevant to my decision of whether I'm going to rely on you to cook food for me. And our desire for this global, interconnected, universal connectivity thing actually conflicts with the what's really happening in social relationships, which is, hey, I know that person, they said something nice about you, okay, I'm willing to take a risk. Yeah.
So I think that's basically a universal principle, which relates to how we experience things. We have no frame to experience things. Words don't make sense. We can't name things. Who would name things? We can't experience it, and so it just goes by. It's just a series of data, right? So what you're saying, holds true in general as we're building up that experience and then building up trust through the repetitive experience that was positive.
I think yes.
I just have, because there's a lot of speech about trust, and I don't really get where the problem is with trust. Because I have a feeling that you're starting with the idea that everybody is not trustworthy. And I work for a co-op that runs a platform, and we are completely trust-based. We do not track our members. We do not put any stars on their performance. We don't rate them on their income. And we have 90,000 members who use our company, so we have the legal responsibility of the way they act within our company. And we handle 136 million euros a year. And we encounter very little or non-fraud. And I have a lot of trouble seeing why we should rate people, because I can see a lot of exclusion and isolation if you scale that system. And I wonder if it's the whole thing is actually a good idea to use the blockchain for that reason, to because I have the feeling that we are going towards a that one, and that we will enhance that by the system that you're describing. And I wonder if the blockchain couldn't do more positive stuff that would...
Yeah. First of all, I think in your business model, you refer to trust between Smart and your members when you say that. And the actual problem is more from person to person, actually. If I want to get a service or to provide a service to somebody who doesn't know me, rightfully they wouldn't trust me. And you refer to a different trust, which is you trust your members, obviously, and you have relatively and actually it's quite encouraging to know that you have that low level of fraud. Actually, that's really encouraging because in my past activities, I've been 15 years in detection of financial crime, and honestly, I would, any system that handles more than 100 million euros, I would really have expected more fraud to exist. So, but that's really good news. But it's more, I think the trust we try to solve using the blockchain is more the trust between two different people that would interact directly without a third party. Because on that part, you play the role of a trusted third party.
Yes, but it's also because it's service related. So we talk a lot about services. So if you talk about services, there's a lot of work involved. And I agree that taking out the middleman in a lot of occasions can be very useful. But taking out the middleman in working conditions
like, and then I'm bringing it back to our field completely.
Yeah.
So there must be hundreds of other ways of handling with the blockchain, but it's just because were the examples that were cited by you guys. I have a lot of troubles seeing companies like Deliveroo say, yeah, go and get my McDonald's and I'll pay you €2. And if you bring that back to the working conditions, I'm happy that there's, in some cases, still a middleman saying, what you're doing is not legal and it's dangerous. And so...
No, I think that the two things. First, the removing the middleman is interesting only if the middleman doesn't bring value, which is the case in a lot of times where the only thing that the middleman brings actually is being a trusted third party, and that's not your case. So
but I'm not bringing it back. But if you go, for example, because somebody talked about the taxis, we're not dealing with them, but you take out the middleman, and so you put people in contact for a peer-to-peer car system, basically. But maybe it's I'm too converted to one model, and I probably am.
No, you would. No, I think the except I mean, forget for one moment every bad thing that you know about Bitcoin. Still, if I already did that. I mean, if I have 2 Bitcoin wallets in 2 different exchanges in 2 different countries, and I say, okay, I want to transfer these Bitcoins from there to there. I push enter, and honestly, 5 minutes later, they are there. If I recently sent to my family in the US money that they still had in a savings account in Belgium. Well, it failed twice, just because the reference for the bank was not correct and so on. Okay, and every time it failed, it costed me 122 euros of fees. That's what I call a not useful middleman. Okay, so these ones I remove them without pity. So I think on the contrary, and there you have to understand how specific smart is. I think your value is being a middleman precisely, because otherwise, if you were not there, you would expose the people working to exactly what the gig economy wants, which is a lot of vulnerable people. So in every model where the middleman is actually performing a role that improves the whole network and the community, well, I don't see a reason to remove them.
Yeah, but I'm just wondering, it's really the rating that worries me a little bit, because it's back to the question of...
Absolutely, it's totally worries us too. I mean, we battle daily with calling this reputation. As I said, it is a way to measure what we want to do is to have a way to measure the value that somebody and the relevance of somebody in a community, not and the way it brings this person brings value to the community, not having 4.5 stars because that, or accumulating bonuses, because that indeed is very dangerous, because yes, and I've heard the Black Mirror thing like 62,345 times since I explained that, but and I still haven't seen it. Okay, but I'm going to watch it. Okay, I need a BitTorrent link if somebody can send me. So that's really not what we want, and precisely that's what we want to fix, because that's how it works today, and that's how it doesn't work. Because I have a good friend in Liège, and he has an Italian restaurant, and it's the 42th restaurant rated by TripAdvisor in the 400 restaurants of Liège, and he's happy with that. The first restaurant of all, by 20% more, is a Bulgarian restaurant where I've been once, and it's awful. But it's the first of 400. Well, okay, for 3 Bitcoins.
It brings it back to the value, and who sets the value, and what is value. And I wonder if the role of blockchain should be looking into ways of... I don't have a solution. I'm just really interested in the topic. But every time that somebody's talking about blockchain, it brings it back to rating and trust. And I'm not convinced that we are lacking. I think we are lacking trust in our human relationships, and that it's just more a like we like so much numbers and stars and symbols that we like to rationalize human relationships, but you cannot rationalize it. And I understand that. I don't know. But we'll have a coffee and go for pizza and we'll talk about it. But
Well, I'm curious if there's something that's more important. If trust is not the thing that's for discussion that you're interested in resolving,
no, it's not that trust is not important. It's just that trust is something that you cannot, in my opinion, it's not something that you can
quantify.
Yes, because
So
it's like, for example, if you take a network like Smart, we have a very diverse group of permanent workers, and we're involved in very different ways of doing. And there are some of the people who are very good just because they are. If I like it always excited and angry, and then I sometimes have people who just calm me down and come to the office and say, Lisa, take a coffee without caffeine, and then they just take care of me. And I trust them, and I know that when they come and offer me a cigarette and a coffee, it's that I just need to calm down. How are you going to implement that in a system?
So a possibility. This is the fundamental understanding for me that trust. It's an incomplete question. If I say, do I trust Matt? That's an incomplete question. Do I trust Matt to do what? Under what circumstances? With what benefit? To what end? Right? Do I trust Matt to hold the rope while I'm rappelling on a wall? Maybe not. Maybe so. No, I think Matt's trustworthy. Would I trust Matt to hold the end of the rappelling rope if I'm up on the wall and somebody's offering him $100 million to walk away? Right. So it's facetious a little bit, but I say I'm going to look at 3 different systems that monetize or that quantify trust in different ways. Right. So Yelp, for instance, reviews restaurants. It has 4.5 stars. I have a better than 50% chance that I'm going to have a decent experience at that restaurant, but it's better than nothing, but it's not guaranteed, right? Okay. So it's but there's the 2 other examples.
I'm confused because I thought the purpose of blockchain was that you don't have to trust.
Well, it depends on. So here's.
You would rate people, and I'm somebody who trusted a controller in the 1990s who moved over $1 million between accounts, and I trusted that the bank was going to think that I was the only signator on the account, but the bank let him move that money between accounts, which enabled managers to do a hostile takeover of my company, people that I thought I trusted.
Right, and so a lot of that has to do with the actual specific contract, right? What is it that I'm actually enabling? How, in what way am I delegating my sovereignty? And I need to be able to do that fractionally and fractally and dynamically. I need to be able to say, you know what, I trusted you yesterday to do this, I no longer trust you. But our systems operate, for goodness sake, still passwords? Are we serious in this day and age? We know that the systems aren't reliable enough to say this 8-character, 16-character string gives access to all of my assets. That's ridiculous, right? So we need to have better systems for that, but we also need to be very careful about determining what is it that we're saying we trust. It's not sufficient to say, I trust you. That's an open check. Cashable anywhere for all time. No, I need to be able to say, what are the bounds of that trust? And did you actually fulfill your end of the obligation? And if not, was it a failure in specifying what that trust was? Or was it a failure in, no, it was intentionality. You intentionally did something and now there's reparations that need to be made in order to rectify that problem. So there's ways in which we can be very precise about it. We don't think that way right now. This is the conceptual space that we were talking about. We don't have mental models that operate in that kind of a domain. We think trust means, yeah, trust. I know what that word means and I give it to you. And that's abusable to an extremely high degree that we need to really question.
And I want to agree with what you're saying about, hey, we can't quantify everything here, right? And nor should we. But we also have other signaling systems for communicating certain information. Like you can say, I've worked with him before. That's not a rating. You can say, she's wonderful when I talk to her. We communicate bits of information, even through facial expressions, that other people go, oh, okay. And those are systems that we use that help someone else. It's not that I say, he's good, he's perfect, blah, 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 he's got 5 stars. It's not that. It's that someone else is making a decision about whether to take a risk, and they're able to improve their decision-making because they had an interaction with us, and they learned something else there. And I've got a friend named Jerry Mikulski who talks about the relationship economy, and he talks about, what if we trusted one another? That's his thing. It's been for a long time. And that's totally right. And there's a bound beyond which me trusting you to bring me a coffee is one thing. Me trusting you with $1 million is a different thing. And I'm going to take, it's okay for me to go, is this going to be safe before I go do that? And for me to try to find out ways to mitigate my risks so that I'm only exposing myself in contexts where I'm not likely to get really hurt. If we don't have that sensing capacity, we crash really regularly. And so we use all of these tools without blockchains now. We do all of these trust-generating habits and practices today. But often we're having to rely on as an institution or some other party for holding some portion of that trust. We're relying on them to be the ones who are backing the relationship. Summer.
So, continuing the Pandora's box that you opened, it's true that when we talk about blockchain, we talk about trustless systems, and it's basically because typically when you use a web service, you have to trust the server or the owner of the server that you're using. When you remove that, is that you are removing this obligatory trust that you have in standard non-blockchain systems. This is the only difference. This implies that if you want to do a web service on the blockchain, you have to, if you want trust, you have to implement it yourself. Because you don't have this compulsory trust that you have with this server, this classical server. And then we open a huge amount of things. So we can implement reputation systems, we can implement histories, we can implement just a badge or a way of, no, you are a member of the same community. And then which is what happens within a community, right? Within a community, trust works much easier because you relate with each other, because you are members of the same group identity, let's say. So these are different ways of, you explained it very well, right? There are multiple ways of generating trust. It's just that when you are dealing with a blockchain system, there is no trust by default. So it doesn't imply that all blockchain applications are trustless or are giving for granted that we are super individualistic and we don't trust each other. And no, it's just that you have to implement it in some way. You have to take decisions that before we were giving for granted. I don't know if I try to. Sorry?
In practical way, the platform cops, I think the advantage is that basically the 500 million that Uber or Deliveroo have had to spend in marketing to enable trust in their brand, you can have it free in blockchain. And that's a very powerful concept. Because you don't have that in the start with, so that's the good.
How I see it, you can also have that in the blockchain. You can also have branding, and that you can also do it if you want to. It's just that it's not the only option.
So I'll mention one other thing about trust that's really important, is that we are now in a situation where trust in the official systems is no longer what it used to be, right? And it's starting to come to light in part. So for instance, we saw someone speak from Black Lives Matter last night. Do black people trust that police officers won't shoot them if they get pulled over because their taillight is out. There's something fundamental about trust that I think we need to, it's in some ways, the question becomes complicated because it is ambiguous, right? So this is kind of what I'm saying. I think that it sounds like I'm complicating it more, but I'm just recognizing it's already complicated beyond the ability for our existing systems to deal with that. We don't have good the tagline that I used when I was putting together my proposal for this is fractal autonomy. How do I act? How do I decide? Where do I put my attention? How do I value my relationships such that I give holographic accountability? Does the world look like, okay, Gandhi's phrase, be the change you want to see in the world. What is the practical application of that? How do we do that? For me, I don't think it's just in terms of a protocol. There's something in terms of my interaction with that protocol that matters. And so I think it's important to get the protocols right, but it's really my interface with that. That's the most critical piece. It's not, no system is going to guarantee my safety without my participation.
Yeah, I just want the topic of trust is very important maybe for us, but if the goal is how our cooperative platforms mass adopted, what is most important for the people is really trust, the security. So the privacy policies are rarely read, etc. So it could be also convenience, no? So I'm just surprised how less security matters for the big masses. So we are concerned about, but that's not the major concern, I think. What do you think?
I don't think it's the major concern. I mean, so a lot of it's really easy to pitch new innovations as solving a pain that people are already experiencing. The pain that people are aware of right now is, hey, these systems are breaking down. Hey, there's privacy breaches. Hey, there's security breaches. So it's easy to point to stuff that people are panicking about to get people motivated to adopt new systems. And at the same time, for most of the folks that are participating in this type of work, that's not what excites them. The thing that excites them is the possibility of new ways of orchestrating coordination that were never before possible. But because you haven't lived them yet, they're also not visible to most people. It's like back when we all had maps in the back of our car that you would pull out to look up, how do I get to this place? You never thought you had a map problem. But then Google Maps showed up, and it was the thing that drove smartphone adoption. That I could go, take me there, and it would literally guide me to the place I was trying to go, because it put me on the map. Well, technology that ends up putting the user in the center, being able to bridge across applications, is like the map that puts you in the middle. Right now, we run to an application and we come back out. Then we run to another application, we come back out. And then we run to another application and we come back out. And we're literally bouncing back and forth between these different proprietary platforms that are trying to addict us and distract us. And so we live these lives where we as humans start to feel like we're being puppeted as if we are machines. Our technology is reducing our humanity. And many of the folks in this space get excited because we go, oh wow, if you invert that, if you put the human in the middle and you enable them to pull the pieces to themselves that work and start to have those play together in ways that work for them, our computers may actually enable us to live a more human experience rather than leaving us to live lives that are stripped of dignity. So but when you go and try to pitch that, the first thing people go, well, how? I can't see it. I haven't envisioned it yet. It's much easier to pitch privacy, security, etc. And so you hear that getting adopted because people already feel that pain. Whereas the other thing is a fantasy that invites skepticism. At the same time, my belief is as we start to see some wins on the board over the next few years, not just God bless the speculators, right? Despite the fact that what they're doing looks really destructive to me, it at least invited a lot of attention. Nobody in the world was excited about distributed applications, except for some geeky computer scientists. Nobody was excited about new forms of accounting. And all of a sudden they are, because a bunch of people started gambling. But there's something more important than that gambling. There is, oh wow, this might actually shift how human social relationships function, and if they do so in a way that's actually enriching and enabling a much more vibrant society.
Thank you. I'll say one last thing too. There isn't one answer for what's the right next thing for me to do, right? I can't say, oh, this is what I'm doing, so you should do it too. Matt can't say, no, you should do what I'm doing. It's up to you to say, you need to engage in this conversation to the point of knowing, do I have an idea? If I don't have an idea, what's the next thing for me to do? What questions should I be asking? Who should I trust to ask those questions? I mean, it's really, how do I get involved? And maybe it's keep watching. I don't know. Maybe it's time for me to sit out and wait. I don't have an answer.
Or dabble and play.
Yeah, or dabble and play. It's a beautiful